Hey everyone! In the last few class periods, we've been wrapping up our central nervous system and finishing up what we know about the brain and the spinal cord and spending a few days to kind of review and make sure we understand that information. For the second half of this test, we're going to learn about our peripheral nervous system. So, our peripheral nervous system is everything outside of our central. So, this is going to be what goes to the rest of our body, our arms, our legs, our face. One thing to know is we have to remember some terminology that we learned in the last test. And that terminology has to do what do we call the fiber tracts, which are your axons and dendrites, and what do we call the cell bodies located in our peripheral nervous system. So for our peripheral nervous system, our fiber tracts are called nerves. In our central nervous system, they were called tracts, but here they're just called nerves. Our cell bodies in our peripheral are called ganglia, whereas in our central, they were called nuclei. So there's a little bit of terminology difference that I kind of just want to bring back up. So speaking of our fiber tracts, these are going to be the ones that send our signal. So let's go over our nerves and kind of how are they protected and what do they kind of look like. As a general review, nerves are bundles of neuron fibers. Neuron fibers or processes, or another way you could say is your axons and your dendrites. Anything that comes off of a cell body are your processes. And again, these are found outside your CNS, so they are not your brain and they're not in your spinal cord. And these are going to be protected by connective tissue coverings. One way they're protected that we've already learned about is that they're going to be surrounded by something called myelin sheath. Myelin sheath just helps speed up the transmission, but also aid in that protective factor. Besides that, there are three other coverings. They are the endoneurium, the perineurium, and the epineurium. And these are going to sound a little familiar. So I'm going to come back to the slide, but let me flip to another slide real quick. These terms should sound familiar because we actually discussed a version of these words when we were going through the muscle chapter. When we named muscles and their coverings, we used the root word mycium. So you might be familiar with epimycium or endomycium and perimycium. All we did was change the root word to neuro to tell us that the structure relates to a nerve. So they tend to have the similar functions in terms of protection and where they're located, but we just changed that root word. So going back, endoneurium, endo always meant the inside. So this is going to be the very inside of our connective tissue that surrounds each single neuron fiber. So each little tiny fiber is surrounded by an endoneurium. Our perineurium is going to be our middle. So if we take a bunch of these neuron fibers and we put them into bundles, we still call those fascicles like we did in our muscular system. And the protective covering that covers a single fascicle is our perineurium. Now, our outermost layer is going to be our epineurium. I remember in the muscle system, I said epi, you stick your EpiPen on the outside. These are going to take several fascicles and group them together, and in fact, actually covers the entire nerve. So here's this little picture that we have. This one's showing that your nerve, your process is your axon that comes off of a cell body. So here's your axon. It's covered by your myelin sheath that helps speed up the transmission of an impulse. That entire thing is covered by your endoneurium, so your innermost covering, which is represented by this yellow. If I put several of those fibers together, they make up a fascicle. So here the fascicle is showing this whole thing, and fascicles are covered and held together by your perineurium. Now you can take several fascicles, so here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 fascicles, and bundle them up with our outermost covering, which is our epineurium. Besides that, let's talk about the way we classify them. Like neurons, nerves are classified based on the direction that we are going to transmit an impulse. Remember, sensory or afferent always means going to the CNS, sending messages to our central nervous system. Motor or efferent means we're going to come away from. So they're going to exit our central nervous system and go to any muscles or glands that they want to stimulate. And then a new one that has not been introduced, so this is a new one, is mixed nerves. Mixed nerves actually contain both sensory and motor fibers. So they're able to take things to the brain and bring things back to our body. Almost all of our spinal nerves are going to be mixed nerves. And most of our cranial nerves are going to be mixed nerves except for a select few. So now that we've kind of had a brief introduction, one thing that we're going to strive to hit today is learning about our cranial nerves. Now there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves and they arise from inside our brain. So that means that their cell body is usually in the CNS, but they come out and serve our head and our neck region. There's actually one pair, known as the vagus nerves, that extend to other regions besides our head and our neck, and this is going to, vagus nerves going to extend into our thoracic and abdominal cavities. So remember, thoracic is our chest, and our abdominal is where our stomach is located. Now, like I said, most are mixed nerves. They do take in senses and send motor signals, but there are three that are only purely sensory. That means they have no motor function whatsoever. And those are optic, olfactory, and vestibulocochlear. Optic, it only does sight, it allows us to see. It does not move the eye, it does not do anything with movement. It's just purely we can see. Olfactory is smell, so just purely take in smell. That's a sense. And then the last one, vestibular cochlear, which usually can go by another name in other textbooks, but for our purposes, they go by this name. This is for our ability to hear and for us to remain our balance. So equilibrium has to do with balance, and they call this sensory because it sends impulses or senses to our brain to tell us we're balanced or not. Now, for our cranial nerves, there are 12, and generally when you go to college, especially if you're going to be a nursing major, they really actually make you memorize the order of cranial nerves. I will not make you memorize the order, but I do expect you to know what their major functions are. Your book does introduce this mnemonic device to kind of help you remember what they are. And basically, the way this works is the first letter goes with the first letter of the nerve. So O, to touch and feel very good velvet at home. It stands for olfactory, optic, ocular, trochlear, um, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal. Again, this gives the order of the nerves from cranial nerve 1 all the way down to cranial nerve 12. So here I like this image because it kind of shows where in the brain do these cranial nerves jut off from. So again, these are going to be nerves that extend off of our brain to go to a lot of our face and neck muscles. I love this because it shows that our cranial nerve 1, our olfactory, goes up and it's pointing to go to our nose and our sense of smell. Here, I love this one because it's jutting off of here, this part of your brain, and it's showing that it's going to your optic. So this is purely going to be your ability to see. Down here, we have red. Red means that it's a lot of motor. And motor, these are going to be three of them in charge of moving our eye. Ocular motor, trochlear, and abducens. These are all of our three motor nerves that help move our eye. Trigeminal, this is going to be going to our a lot of different responses within our face. So, but they also go to responses in our face in terms of chewing. So here I just want to point out that blue is our senses. So trigeminal does take in senses on our face, but it's able to move our chewing muscle. So this is a major, huge chewing muscle that we have right here. Over here for our facial, there's 3 lines. There is motor, so it does help us move our facial muscles that we learned in our muscular system. It also, here is another motor. It helps secrete our salivary glands, so release saliva. But this blue line is sensory, so it does help bring in senses that we feel around our eye. So I love these little lines, and you can kind of look at this picture a little bit longer to kind of see if you want to piece together what they do. So remember, blue is going to be sensory, and then red is motor. So from there, this is in your textbook, and you actually are filling this out in your notes. You can pause the video and then continue it if you kind of want to hear what their major function is or things that I point out. But I'm just going to go through those 12 cranial nerves, their function, and some important things to kind of know about them. First, olfactory. Please know that this is one of your ones that is purely sensory that we labeled in the other slide, and it's for smell. Optic, again, this is our second one that is purely sensory, and this is for our vision. From there, if we go to cranial nerve 3, this one is a mixed nerve. So a lot of times, most people actually associate this one with just as a motor neuron or motor nerve because it does supply a lot of functions or actions for our eyeball to move our eyeball, also to our eyelid to allow us to blink and control different eye movements in terms of making sure our pupils are dilated or not dilated. The next one is your trochlear. This is also often associated with motor fibers, again with eye muscle movement. Oops. You have your trigeminal. It does both sensory and motor. So here it describes that it takes in senses from your face. So a lot of your facial senses that you feel are taken in by this nerve. But the motor part of it is it helps with our chewing. So helps you chew gum. Abducens, this is another one that helps control eye movement. So one thing I would know here, and I'm going to go ahead and star it, is it helps move your eyes laterally. And that just means to the left and the right. The next one is facial. So here, this has both sensory and it has motor functions. So one of the motor functions is it helps you give facial expressions, helps you smile, helps you whistle, it helps you do a frown face. And it also has a function in sensory. So it takes in senses from your taste buds. In fact, you can test for your ability to see if things are sweet or salty or sour or bitter. The next one is Vestibulocochlear. Again, this is your third one that is just sensory, nothing else, just sensory. And this is going to be your hearing and balance. The next two, Glossopharyngeal. For your glossopharyngeal, it gives motors. So it's in charge of your pharynx, which is where the pharyngeal comes in. And your pharynx, when we learn about your digestive system, this is your throat. So this is going to promote your ability to swallow your food and also release saliva in order for you to break down your food into small pieces to be swallowed. But it's also sensory as well because it also goes to your taste buds, but on the back side of your mouth. So this will help you be able to taste that salt, sugar, sweet, things like that. Vagus, we've mentioned this one already. This one actually is not going to supply your face or your neck muscles. This is actually going to go deeper down and affect your thoracic cavity and your abdominal cavity. And the very last two are accessory and hypoglossal. Accessory These activate two muscles that we learned, your sternocleidomastoid, which attaches to your temporal bone and then down onto your clavicle, and then your trapezius muscle, which is a major muscle in your neck. And one thing I do want to point out here is it helps you rotate your head and shrug your shoulders. And then last but not least, round up our 12 cranial nerves is hypoglossal. And one thing to point out, again, it's a mixed nerve. We have motor and sensory fibers. It allows us to move our tongue, and then some senses. It helps us take in some senses from our tongue or impulses that we can take in based on whether things are sticky or different textures things have for our tongue. So that is the end of today's lesson. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you guys have a great day.